It's a pleasure to be able to meet you all virtually. Certainly would have been better doing everything face to face, but this is the best that we can do. I'm just here to share a small part of my journey. Allow me to weave in a few stories with threads of connection into this session. I'll try to keep it as lively as possible. I'm not here to give advice or anything of that sort. I'm just here to share what worked best for me, and hopefully that works for you as well. So my quest for adventure comes from the place that I grew up in. That's the place that I always connected to. And I've always connected every aspect of my life to this base platform because that's what groomed me to what I am today. The people, the culture, all of that plays a huge role as well. I've learned so much from this place and I continue to keep learning as well. For the sake of the global audience, let's just call this place home. I come from simple backgrounds. It has an urban touch interlaced with rural influences. I'm Indian by birth. I try to understand the numerous cultures there around me. 20 something years old, I have one foot in the traditional Indian roots and the other one in the cosmopolitan globalized society. And I'm guessing that most of you youngsters in today's call would be in similar shoes as well. Being exposed to both sides of the world can actually get you very confused. It's about finding your identity within this entire mess and sticking to it. I know it's easier said than done. So let me try to spice this episode up a little bit with some personal stories and connections that have helped me find myself. I started fresh right out of college at the age of 19. I got recruited by a Big Four. The consulting life certainly looked promising back then. It still is promising as well. I'm still there with them. I immersed myself into every corporate jargon there possible. I was dishing out internal audit reports one after the other. I number crunched my way into late nights. I gained so much experience by adding value for the clients. I mean, because you learn in that entire journey as well. Through this entire journey, I got the chance to be able to travel for work. And I think I've been pretty lucky with that regard. Approximately 27 countries later, many of which were solo travels, I'm glad I chose this route. I kept my connection with my heritage in check always, while I spent 1 month or so in a new country, and I would come back with stories from their experiences, only to be able to travel back to another new country a few weeks later. My family would actually complain that I used to use home like a hotel back then to get my clothes laundered, eat some good food, and then leave immediately after that. Interestingly, this was my life for about 6 years until the pandemic and marriage took over. I learned a lot about the work-life balance everywhere. Work ethics around the world is rather interesting, from the Filipinos spending so many hours at work to the annual summer vacations that the Europeans enjoy. Both sides have pros and cons, and it's about adopting a fine balance between the two, finding what works well for you and doing that. 8 years later, I still struggle with it a little bit, but I think I'm doing so much better at adopting this fine model. The work from home environment and hybrid scenarios have actually helped a lot. And it's glad to know that most corporates are actually going that way. During my travels, I found more connections and I wove them into my experiences. From catching a sunrise on a calm beach in Miami to capturing the pink sunset at Subic Bay, Philippines. From working out of Manhattan and walking through the hustle and bustle there to soaking in the greenery at Central Park. From one-day tours to Estonia via ferry from Helsinki and then sightseeing Hong Kong under 24 hours thanks to a long layover. From doing the most cliched things, touristy things like taking a boat cruise in Sydney to immersing myself in the culture and behaving like a local in Denmark by having a picnic in a cemetery. From watching the US Open live at New York to watching a small skit in the middle of the olden Roman open air theaters in Delphi, Greece. From driving through the scenic Transfiguration Highway in Romania to strolling through the Magnificent Mile in Chicago. From soaking myself in the older Olympic stadiums at Helsinki to admiring the modern Olympic Village in Greece. Each of these experiences have come from my solo journeys. All of them have been because of some personal time that I managed to squeeze into a usually tight work schedule. Let me pause for a second here. Life can't always be that rosy, right? That is actually completely true in my case as well. I've had my fair share of fears before being able to venture out and do something with confidence. Activities, places that I would have ideally liked to have visited or done might not have been possible as a solo traveler, or the budget might have like shot through the roof and I would have pulled out last minute. I do regret some of these decisions, but the one thing is that I tend to ensure that these decisions don't rule my life at the end of the day. I tend to forget, move on, try to find the next connection and add that on to my bucket of things that I'm glad to have done. For example, I didn't venture out to see Shashashan when I was in Morocco. I didn't go to Bali when I was in Indonesia. I didn't visit the beautiful Lake Alberta when I was in Toronto. I didn't experience the Maori life or visit Hobbiton when I was in New Zealand. God knows when I'll go back to these countries again. But I mean, like it's the lack of time, long distance, the shortage of a budget. All of this led to me not being able to do any of this. And like I said earlier, life comes with decisions that we are sometimes forced to take, and sometimes it's natural to regret them. On the safety side, I must say that with my limited experiences, the world is actually a pretty safe place to immerse yourself into. The kind of people that come out and help you are numerous. I've had strangers wake me up at train stations when I was going to miss it, or I've had locals translate and help me with directions when I desperately needed it. In fact, a stranger even cut a birthday cake for me the day I turned 16 when I was on a transatlantic flight, just because I would have otherwise lost my entire birthday with time differences. Um, I've even had a long lost acquaintance who helped me with some extra cash when I was running low on cash, because those are the days when you just when you just travel without planning so much. So I'm glad to have grown up since then. But yeah, back to the world and how safe or inviting it can actually be. I have a story to share here. I don't know how many of you might have read the news back then, but then in 2015, Chennai had some terrible floods. It was one where like literally half the city was insulated. I was in Stockholm at that time, beyond worried. I'd lost contact with my family. It was about 4 days since I last spoke to them. You see media sharing visuals. It was scary. I thought of staying back in Europe, but my 90-day visa was expiring and I had no clue as to where my final destination would be because the Chennai airport was closed. The Stockholm airport had no clue that, there was an airport that was completely closed in India either. So without any clue as to what my future destination would be, I just took the flight. I couldn't even tell anyone at home that I was returning back. This was when I actually reached out for some help. A lot of friends and even a few strangers helped me during this process. The Emirates desk at Dubai asked me where I'd like to fly instead of Chennai. And my immediate response was either Bangalore or Cochin, where it's easy to drive down to Chennai right after that. But flights to all these cities were like booked out for an entire week. And the emergency visa that I had gave me access to Dubai only for 3 days. So I reached out to some old colleagues and friends in Delhi, and 72 hours later, I was on my way to India, crashed at their place in Delhi until I found myself a flight to Bangalore, and then I took a taxi down to Chennai. Bottom line here, it's the connections that you make, whether through social media or otherwise, who help you during turbulent times. And it's always good to keep in touch and network. Throughout this time, my brain kept going back to the connection that I had made with home, the city that I call home. And I could not see my society or my citizens there struggle when I was actually completely safe. So I tried to do everything that I could from where I was. I organized funds, ensured that it found the right people, helped people find guest houses where they could rest. In fact, when I was in Delhi, I interacted with numerous NGOs and student body unions, and we collected over 80 kilos of medicine that I was able to fly back to Chennai. I even convinced Indigo Airlines to let me fly that for free by explaining that it was for the deserving and the needy during the floods. All of this is just a small drop in a larger ocean that humanity collectively brought together back then. But it's something that kept me going. It gave me the satisfaction that I connected back to my base and I contributed when help was direly needed. I'm a little bit of an adventure junkie. I've bungee jumped in South Africa, skydived in Chicago, skywalked in Sydney, scuba dived in the Andamans, snorkeled in Maldives, kayaked many lakes, trekked numbers of trails. The discipline and the sense of awareness that adventure sports inculcates, along with the thrill of actually being free while doing it, will help you connect to your identity more closely. I'm sure a lot of you here might actually be wondering as to how I convinced my parents to allow me to do all of these things in my early 20s. That too, being an Indian girl, the society can be a little hard. I mean, there are certain boxes that you have to tick off at certain ages, otherwise, you are potentially not called marriage material. The pressures were hard for me as well, but I was just lucky that my parents allowed me to express my opinions before they ended up saying no to a decision I wanted to take. So I tried to be as open as possible with them when discussing plans, irrespective of whether the plan was on the professional side or on the personal side. Also, being the eldest in my generation, I knew that my extended family will inevitably want me to stay back here so that I can tend to family requirements. I tried my level best to ensure that all of these restrictions didn't chip my wings away. As long as my family knew that my connection was still with home, they were more than happy to allow me to explore and experience the world. I, in fact, brought back so many friends, recipes, stories, connections from there, and it kept them engaged as well. Well, talking about the best thing that these connections did for me, I recollect a very favorite story of mine. While in college in Bangalore, we had a foreign exchange student who stayed in the same hostel as me. We hit it off instantly. We were young teenagers back then. We spoke about the differences in the cultures in Norway, which was her homeland, and back here in India. From the festivals to the topography, perspectives to the ethics in general, conversations were aplenty. I took her back to my native place in rural Tamil Nadu to attend a cousin's wedding. I helped her tie a sari and all. She spent an entire week at my place. We even connected on Facebook, but of course, with time you do lose touch somewhere or the other. The reconnection was so instant, when I met her 8 years later in Norway. I was there for a small project. We had dinner one Friday night. Immediately we connected, and within 15 minutes we planned a full weekend trip back to her parents' place, which is in the middle of the Norwegian fjords. We took an overnight train to Bergen, an extremely beautiful city there, and we trekked the famed Preikestolen, also called the Pulpit Rock. You can actually Google the Pulpit Rock, and it's a beautiful place. It's just a small example of how long a connection can go when it actually serves its purpose at the end. So that's just a beautiful story. I've evolved during these years. I've moved on from being a person who took a facility to actually becoming a facilitator as well. My first international trip alone was when I was 15. I flew a 16-hour journey across the country, across the world to Washington, D.C., and I needed facilities there. Like I needed someone to come pick me up, settle me into a conference, and things like that. But over the decade, I've gone on to becoming that facilitator for other strangers when they were traveling. During layovers in Frankfurt or Dubai, for example, I've babysat little kids when their mothers wanted to rest for a bit. There's another very interesting story. On a flight back home from, I think, Chicago, it was via Cathay Pacific. We were actually caught in a terrible thunderstorm and a lightning stroke. It was one of those weather conditions where the flight actually drops a lot in altitude while flying mid-air. Very, very scary time. I was extremely sure that, I was going to miss my connecting flight back and things like that. And this was a weather condition that we knew even before we boarded the flight. So other Indians there in Chicago who were coming to drop their parents off for this exact same route that I was traveling, wanted me to help them out, help the parents out, and make sure that they got onto the same connecting flight as well. So when the flight landed in Hong Kong, I couldn't just rush out of the gate and go on to the next aircraft. I kind of waited, organized wheelchairs for these four elderly couples, helped them get through security and everything. And I took them along through the entire journey. Finally, at the destination as well, I made sure that they were picked up by the right people before I headed back home. It's just that these little bits of compassion, right? And what you give back, even if that connection is just a stranger, it is something that they might think of a little later on in their years. And it's just a nice feeling of compassion at the end of the day. It enriches your life in general. While growing up, I was always told that there's enough space for everybody to flourish in this massively opportunistic world. The corporates might have made the place a rat race, but if it ain't worth chasing, don't bother chasing it if you're not connected to it. I've always believed that you shouldn't put all of your eggs in one basket. So while you keep a day job that helps you put bread and butter on the table, try to also have a side passion that keeps you connected to your identity and gives you the stamina to keep going. This is what is popularly called as a side hustle. Trust me, this the side hustle doesn't have to like bring you money or fame or anything of that sort. It's just something that you identify and relate yourself with. um, Beyond the consultant or the audit life that I generally lead, I try to engage with a lot of my passions. Many of them center around my hometown, and that's the reason why I started this blog and this Instagram page. It's that connecting thread for me. The page is Madras Vasi. Madras, the place that I call home, popularly known as Chennai today, and Vasi meaning a person who lives in that place. I tend to write a little bit about the travels that I've done. I post a lot about the food that I cook. I generally keep things as positive as possible on that particular platform, and I keep it as true to real life as possible. I have outside of this space, I've also freelanced and written for a lot of newspapers, and I continue to write for a lot of blogs. I do a little bit of financial journalism as well, basically combining the finance knowledge that I've picked up because of my education and the love for writing that I have. When I freelanced with the Hindu, about 15 of my articles got published with them. This was all when I was in college. It's just a backup plan, that you keep throughout. Through my travels in the last 9 years, I was always given the chance or the opportunity to work on secondments abroad. I consciously took the decision not to pursue any of this, as I knew that there would be a distance that I would end up creating with the identity that I then built for myself. Somewhere deep down, I knew if I picked this up, I might lose the connections that I constructed for myself. And I hence tried to engage with the world from my tiny little cushiony niche space. Um, did you know that olive ridleys actually migrate and travel for over 9,000 kilometers just to come back to the same beach that they hatched at to lay their eggs? That's the reassurance and the relief that you get when you go back to your familiar backgrounds, basically when you connect back with home. The theme that you see throughout these tiny incidents is the fact that I kept home as my base. I went out, made connections, explored the unexplored, got accustomed to the unexpected, and I imbibed from all of these distant cultures, only to come back and touch base with the connections again, but still enrich the base that I created for myself. No Michelin star meal can give you the same comfort and warmth as a simple rice porridge from your own kitchen. Similarly, no fancy skyscraper can replace the sense of belonging that you get while lounging on your own couch at home. So let me end this episode with some words from the bottom of my heart. Something that I've listened to for over 15 years. Come back home, be comfortable in your own skin, in your own legacy. Discover what keeps you content and pursue that. Find your niche in this vast ecosystem, give back to society, and allow your connections, that is, the people, the places, and even the perspectives, to drive the way you want to live. Find a base backing that helps you stay grounded. It calms your nerves, and it's a connection that you can attach both your personal and your professional goals to. Ultimately, create a foundation that you can call your own and add in the connections that can make it a better place for you to live in. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's been a pleasure to talk to all of you, and I hope to connect with all of you in the future.